There is a story in the Bible that few pastors have the courage to preach. A story so shocking, so human, so full of scandal and redemption that it has been practically forgotten in modern pulpits. We are talking about Judah and Tamar, the story no sermon wants to tell. You know those biblical passages you read and think, is this really here? Well, this is one of them. Hidden within Genesis chapter 38, amidst the grand stories of Joseph and his brothers, lies a disturbing account. An account of desire, deceit, profound shame, and one of the greatest demonstrations of divine grace you've ever seen. What makes this story even more impressive? It involves none other than Judah, the patriarch of the tribe that would father kings, prophets, and amazingly, the Messiah himself. And Tamar, a woman whom the church has practically erased from collective memory. A woman who dared to defy the norms, who took her destiny into her own hands, and ended up entering the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Have you ever stopped to wonder why this story was included in the scriptures? Why did God allow such a scandal to be part of the messianic lineage? The answer will surprise you, and more, it will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about sin, redemption, and God's plan. Throughout this video, we'll delve into ancient customs, the secrets of Scripture, and hidden truths that are rarely taught. And at the end, stay until the very end, I'll show you the most powerful revelation in this whole story, a truth that will change the way you see God's grace. So take a deep breath, because this journey won't be easy, but it will be transformative. Why is it that certain biblical stories simply disappear from sermons? It's not because they're unimportant. It's not because they're irrelevant. It's because they confront us with uncomfortable truths. Truths about human nature, moral failings, and God's scandalous mercy. The story of Judah and Tamar is exactly like that. It's there in Genesis 38 between chapter 37, where Joseph is sold into slavery, and chapter 39, where he resists Potiphar's wife. It's as if Moses paused the main narrative to show us something we couldn't ignore, something that, however disturbing, needed to be told. And the most intriguing part, this is not a secondary story. It's not a detail lost in the genealogies. It's a fundamental piece in the messianic lineage. Yes, you understood correctly. Judah and Tamar are direct ancestors of Jesus Christ. Matthew mentions them right in the first chapter of his gospel. This is not an accident. It's a divine purpose. But here's the thing. What happened between these two was so controversial, so morally complex, that for centuries theologians have debated what to do with this story. Some have tried to soften it, others have preferred to ignore it completely. But it remains there in the sacred pages, waiting to be understood. What if I told you that this forbidden story holds one of the most profound lessons about how God works through our failings? How he transforms shame into blessing, how he uses the unlikely, the scandalous, the rejected to fulfill his eternal purposes. To understand what happened between Judah and Tamar, we need to go back thousands of years in time. We need to transport ourselves to a world where the laws were different, where customs shaped destinies, and where a childless woman was considered cursed. In ancient Israel, there was a law called spread track. The term comes from the Latin levir, meaning brother-in-law. This law stipulated that if a man died without leaving children, his brother had the sacred obligation to marry the widow. The firstborn son of this union would be considered the heir of the deceased, ensuring that his name would not be erased from Israel. Does it seem strange to us today? Perhaps. But back then, it was a matter of survival and dignity. A widow without children had no inheritance rights. She had no social protection. She had no future. Levirate marriage was both a law of mercy and a way to preserve the tribal lineage. Now imagine the scene, a young woman named Tamar, newly married to Judah's firstborn son. The house is simple, its stone walls still smelling of olive oil and fresh bread. Tamar wakes up every morning hoping to build a family, dreaming of the day she will hold her first child in her arms. But was wicked in the eyes of the Lord. The scriptures don't detail his sins, but we know enough. God took him from life prematurely. Tamar finds herself widowed even before becoming a mother. The grief is profound, but there is hope. The law of levirate marriage. Judah, her father-in-law, orders Onan, the second son, to fulfill his duty. Onan accepts, but not wholeheartedly. He unites with Tamar, but deliberately prevents her from becoming pregnant because he doesn't want his brother's inheritance to be preserved. He wants everything for himself, and God, seeing this wickedness disguised as obedience, also takes Onan's life. 2 husbands dead. Tamar now carries not only grief, but a terrible suspicion. Is she cursed? Does she bring death with her? Judah thinks exactly that. He is afraid of losing his 3rd son, Shelah, as well. Then Judah does something cruel. He lies. He tells Tamar, "Go back to your father's house, wait until Shelah grows up, and then he will marry you." But deep down, Judah has no intention of keeping this promise. He is protecting his youngest son at the cost of Tamar's future. He is condemning her to a life of abandonment and shame. And Tamar, she obeys. She returns to her father's house, puts on her widow's clothes, and waits, and waits, and waits. Years pass. Shelah grows up, becomes a man, but no call from Judah comes. The promise has been forgotten. Tamar has been discarded. How would you feel if you were her? Betrayed by the very family that should have protected her, abandoned by those who had the sacred obligation to care for her. There are women in Scripture who shine like stars: Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel. Their names are celebrated, their stories told and retold, but there are others who have been deliberately erased, forgotten, silenced. Tamar is one of them. We don't know where she came from. We don't know her family background. There's no description of her beauty or virtues. She simply appears in the narrative as the woman Judah chose for his son And then, nothing. Just widowhood, waiting, and abandonment. But pay attention. Tamar's silence is not weakness. It's strategy. It's observation. It's a woman learning that no one will come to save her, that if she wants justice, she will have to seek it with her own hands. Think of her loneliness. Years returning to her father's house, hearing the whispers in the community. Poor Tamar, 2 dead husbands. She must be cursed. The other women walk away. The doors close. Time passes, and with it, any hope of a dignified future. She waits. She watches, and discovers that Shelah is already an adult. He could already fulfill his promise. But Judah does nothing. The truth is as clear as the desert sun. He will not keep his promise. She has been abandoned to her own fate. And here's the crucial point. Tamar wasn't just a passive victim. She was a woman of extraordinary courage, a woman who understood that sometimes, to make justice happen, you have to make impossible decisions. Decisions that the world will judge. Decisions that can cost everything. She knew that legally, morally, and spiritually, she had a right to that lineage. She had a right to be a mother in the house of Judah. She had a right not to be forgotten. But no one would hand that to her on a silver platter. So Tamar begins to plan, a daring plan, dangerous, morally questionable, but in her mind, it was the only way to reclaim what had been stolen from her. What would you do in her place? Would you accept the imposed fate, or would you fight, even if it meant crossing all the lines? Judah. The name means praise. He was Jacob's 4th son, the one who suggested selling Joseph into slavery instead of killing him. An act of dubious mercy, but one that saved his brother's life. Judah was, in a way, a natural leader, someone who made decisions, who influenced others. But leadership without character is merely power misdirected. After betraying Joseph, Judah distances himself from his family. Genesis 38 begins with the revealing phrase, "At that time, Judah went down from his brothers." He didn't just leave geographically, he descended spiritually, morally. He distanced himself from those he should have protected. He marries a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua. He has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Then he arranges marriage to Tamar. Everything seems to be going according to plan, but God intervenes. Dies because of his wickedness. Onan also dies. And here is Judah's fatal mistake. He promises Shelah to Tamar, but he doesn't keep his promise. Why? Fear, superstition, selfishness. Judah believed that Tamar was the cause of his sons' deaths. He failed to see that the problem lay in their wickedness, not in her. So he lies. He says he will fulfill the law of levirate marriage, but deliberately ignores it. And do you know what that means? It means that Judah, the man chosen to be the ancestor of kings and the Messiah, was failing in his most basic responsibility. He was breaking a sacred law. He was abandoning a defenseless woman. Years pass. Judah's wife dies. He mourns. And then, when he is free of obligations, he decides to go to Timnah for the sheep shearing. It is a festive time, a time of celebration and, for many, of debauchery. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this content, please like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. This really helps us bring these transformative stories to more people. Judah is going to Timnah. He's carefree. Maybe he's even completely forgotten about Tamar. After all, she's no longer his problem, right? Wrong, because Tamar is about to remember him in a way he'll never forget. What happens when a man forgets his responsibilities? When he thinks he can simply move on and leave the hurt behind? Usually, life finds a way to bring him back to reality. Tamar hears the news. Judah is going to Timnah. His mourning is over. He is free. And Shelah, now an adult, is still not given to her. The promise has died. Hope has faded. But something inside Tamar ignites. It is not revenge. It is justice. It is a claim. It is a fierce determination not to be extinguished. She makes a decision that will shock generations. She removes her widow's garments. She covers herself with a veil. And she positions herself at the entrance to Enaim on the road to Timnah. Disguised, unrecognizable, waiting. What is she doing? She is posing as a cult prostitute, common in that region. Women who prostituted themselves in pagan sanctuaries as part of fertility rituals. It was a detestable practice for the Hebrews, but known among the Canaanites. Tamar knew Judah would pass by. She knew that, recently widowed and during a festive season, he might be tempted. She was betting everything on a single move. If she failed, she would be discovered, humiliated, and possibly executed. If she succeeded, well, he would get what was rightfully his. Is it a sin? Is it strategy? Is it desperation or courage? The scriptures do not condemn it, they merely recount it, and that in itself is extraordinary. Judah appears, he sees the woman covered, and he does exactly what Tamar expected. He proposes a meeting. Come, let me be with you. He doesn't hesitate, he doesn't question, he simply acts. The man who should be a moral example, who should lead his family in righteousness, is about to lie with a woman he believes to be a prostitute. Tamar asks, "What will you give me to stay with me?" Judah promises a young goat from the flock, but she is clever. "And what will you give me as security until you send the payment?" Impatient, Judah hands over his personal belongings. The seal, the cord, and the staff, symbols of his identity, his authority, his lineage. He has no idea that he has just handed over proof of his own mistake. They come together. The relationship is brief, consummated. And Tamar disappears into the night, taking with her more than objects, taking with her the seed that would forever change the history of Israel. Could God use even our most serious mistakes to accomplish his purposes? Is there redemption for what seems irreparable? Judah wakes up the next day with no idea what just happened. To him, it was merely a moment of weakness, a moral lapse that will soon be forgotten. He sends his friend Hira, the Adullamite, with the promised goat to retrieve his belongings, but the woman has disappeared. Hira asks the inhabitants of Enaim, "Where is the cult prostitute who was by the roadside?" The answer is disconcerting. There has never been a prostitute here. Judah is disturbed, but decides not to insist. Let her keep her things, so that we will not be the object of ridicule. He prefers to lose his belongings rather than publicly admit that he sought out a prostitute. He prefers silence to shame, and so he files the episode away in his memory as something insignificant, something that will have no consequences. But Tamar knows the truth. She carefully keeps the seal, the cord, and the staff. She returns home. She removes the veil. She puts on her widow's clothes again, and she waits, not for the justice of Judah, but for the justice of God. 3 months pass, and then the news explodes in the community. Tamar is pregnant. The widow, the woman who should be waiting for Shelah, is expecting a child, and there is no husband. There is no acceptable justification. The accusation is immediate: adultery, prostitution, dishonor, and the sentence, according to the law of the time, is unequivocal: death, probably by burning, the most severe punishment for crimes of this nature. Upon hearing the news, Judah reacts with furious indignation. Take her out so she can be burned. The irony is devastating. The man who just a few months ago sought out a prostitute now condemns a woman to death for alleged immorality. The man who abandoned Tamar, who broke his promise, who left her without a future, now demands her execution. But Tamar is not helpless. She's not resigned. She sent a message to Judah along with the objects. "I am pregnant by the man to whom these things belong. Please examine whose seal, cord, and staff these are." Silence. The world stops. Judah holds the objects in his trembling hands. He recognizes them, he understands them, and for the first time in years, he sees the truth about himself. What seemed to be an irreversible scandal was about to become the greatest lesson in humility and redemption that Judah would ever receive. Imagine the scene. The crowd gathered, Tamar being led out of the city, the accusations echoing, the firewood being piled up, the fire being prepared. Everyone awaits the execution. Everyone awaits the end of yet another woman who transgressed the sacred laws. But then Judah speaks, and the words that come out of his mouth change everything. "She was more righteous than I." 5 words, just 5 words, but they carry the weight of a complete confession. Judah is not merely acknowledging his fatherhood, he is acknowledging his own failure, his own sin, his own injustice. "She was more righteous than I, for I did not give her my son Shelah." Judah publicly admits that he broke his promise, that he abandoned Tamar, that he violated the law of levirate marriage, and that everything Tamar did, however questionable, was a desperate attempt to reclaim what was rightfully hers. The crowd falls silent. Tamar is spared. The death sentence is revoked. And something extraordinary happens. Shame is transformed into a blessing. The scandal becomes part of the divine plan. What should have been the end becomes a new beginning. Tamar gives birth to twins. During the delivery, one of them stretches out his hand, and the midwife ties a scarlet thread to it, saying, "This one came out first." But the baby withdraws his hand, and the other is born first. She exclaims, "How you broke through!" And the boy is named Perez, which means breach. The other is called Zerah, meaning brightness or spring. 2 sons, 2 legitimate heirs of Judah, and through Perez, the lineage that would lead to David, Solomon, and centuries later to Jesus Christ himself. God took the most improbable, the most scandalous, the most shameful episode and transformed it into an instrument of salvation. He did not ignore the sin, he did not approve of the methods, but he used everything to fulfill his eternal purpose. The question remains, why would God do this? Why include this story in the genealogy of the Messiah? Why not choose a lineage that is cleaner, holier, more acceptable? Because God's grace doesn't work that way. Grace isn't for the perfect, It's for the broken, the flawed, the desperate. It is precisely in our shame that God's glory shines brightest. She was more righteous than I. These words of Judah echo through the centuries as a powerful testament to transformation. It's not just an admission of guilt. It's an inner revolution. It's a proud man being shattered by the truth and reborn in humility. Think about what God did here. He could have used anyone else, any other story, any other lineage. But he chose this one. He chose Judah, the man who sold his brother. He chose Tamar, the woman who disguised herself as a prostitute. He chose an encounter arranged by deception and desperation. Why? Because God specializes in using the improbable. He used Moses, a fugitive assassin with a speech impediment, to liberate Israel. He used David, a teenage shepherd, to defeat giants and rule a nation. He used Mary, a young virgin from Nazareth, to bring the Savior into the world. And he used Judah and Tamar, with all their moral complexity, to establish the royal lineage. God doesn't need perfection. He needs availability. He's not looking for someone who has never made a mistake. He's looking for someone who is willing to acknowledge their error and get back up again. Judah never touched Tamar again. The scriptures make this clear. And he did not have relations with her again. Not because she was impure, but because he finally understood the gravity of his responsibility. He understood that some actions have eternal weight. Tamar, in turn, was honored. Her children were recognized. Her name was preserved. And when Matthew writes the genealogy of Jesus, he doesn't hide this story, he highlights it. Judah begat Perez and Zerah of Tamar. Why would Matthew do that? He could have omitted the embarrassing details. He could have listed only the male names, as was the custom. But no, he mentions Tamar. He also mentions Rahab the prostitute, Ruth the foreigner, Bathsheba, the woman with whom David committed adultery. Matthew is telling us something profound. God's grace is not ashamed of our history. He doesn't use us despite our flaws. He uses us through them. He transforms our mess into a message, our pain into purpose, our shame into glory. Have you ever felt disqualified because of your past? Have you ever thought that your mistakes were too great to be redeemed? The story of Judah and Tamar is here to tell you there is no mistake that God's grace cannot reach. Perez grows up. He becomes the father of Hezron. Hezron begets Ram. Ram begets Amminadab. And the lineage continues, generation after generation, until it reaches a young shepherd named David, the man after God's own heart, the king who would unify Israel, the direct ancestor of the Messiah. It all began with Judah and Tamar. When you read Matthew 1 and see that list of names that are difficult to pronounce, it's easy to skip ahead. It's easy to find it boring. But each name there carries a story. And some of those stories are about people who, humanly speaking, should never have been there. Tamar shouldn't have been there. Rahab, the prostitute of Jericho who hid the spies, shouldn't have been there. Ruth, the Moabite, from a cursed people, shouldn't have been there. Bathsheba, the fruit of adultery and murder, shouldn't have been there. But they all are. Why? Because God is building a narrative that says, "My son did not come only for the saints. He came for sinners. He did not come only for the pure. He came for the broken." Jesus was born into a lineage marked by scandal. This was no accident. It was purpose. God was preparing the world to understand that the Messiah would not be a distant, untouchable king too perfect to relate to our humanity. He would be a king who understood betrayal because he came from a family that had known betrayal, who would understand abandonment because there was abandonment in his family tree, who would understand shame and redemption because these things ran in his blood. The messianic lineage is not clean, it is not immaculate, it is real, it is raw, it is profoundly human, and precisely for that reason it is profoundly hopeful, Perez, whose name means breach, opened a breach so that God's mercy could flow through generations. He opened a breach so that you and I could understand that no matter how broken we are, God can use us. Can you see it now? The story the church doesn't tell is also the story the church most needs to tell, because it reminds us that God doesn't give up on us, that He is not ashamed of our story, that He can take even the most shattered pieces of our lives and build something eternal. And this isn't just the story of Judah and Tamar. It's your story. It's my story. It's the story of everyone who has ever felt unworthy, stained, forgotten, but who discovered that grace is greater than any shame. So why is this story so rarely preached? Why do pastors and Bible teachers hesitate to address Judah and Tamar as often as they address David and Goliath or Moses and the Red Sea? Perhaps because it makes us uncomfortable. Perhaps because it doesn't fit into our neat theology, where the heroes of faith are always noble and their victories always clean. Perhaps because it forces us to confront truths we prefer to avoid, that God's people fail, that leaders err, that desperate women make questionable decisions, and that, even so, God does not abandon His plan. This story teaches us that holiness is not the absence of flaws. It is the humility to acknowledge our flaws and the courage to persevere. It teaches us that redemption is not for those who deserve it, but for those who need it. It teaches us that God is not looking for perfect resumes. He is looking for broken hearts. Judah could have denied it. He could have destroyed the evidence. He could have let Tamar die and protected his reputation, but he chose the truth. He chose justice. And in that choice, he found redemption. Tamar could have resigned herself. She could have accepted a life of abandonment and oblivion, but she fought. Imperfectly, riskily, controversially, but she fought. And God honored her courage. This is the story no sermon wants to tell, but that we all need to hear, because it frees us from the illusion that we need to be perfect to be used by God. It frees us from the shame that paralyzes us. It frees us from the lie that some mistakes are too big to be redeemed. If you are watching this video now and carrying a weight of shame, of mistake, of something you think God could never use, let this story speak to you. You are not disqualified. You have not been forgotten. Your mistake is not greater than grace. God used Judah. He used it, Tamar. She used a moment of weakness, deceit, and despair to bring the Savior's lineage into the world. If He can do that, what can't He do with your life? The question isn't whether you made a mistake. We all make mistakes. The question is, are you willing to be honest about it? Are you willing to say, like Judah, I have failed? Are you willing to stand up like Tamar and believe that there is still a purpose for you? Because that is the true hidden message in Genesis 38. It is not a story about perfect morality. It is a story about scandalous grace. It is about a God who is not afraid to get His hands dirty with our humanity, who is not ashamed of our failings, who transforms shame into blessing, error into purpose, scandal into salvation. And in the end, when Jesus was born centuries later, He looked back at His own family tree and saw Judah and Tamar, and He felt no shame. He felt identification, because He came precisely for people like that, for people like them, for people like us. We've reached the end of this unsettling and transformative journey, and now you know. Now you understand why this story was hidden for so long. Not because it's irrelevant, but because it's too powerful, too true, too uncomfortable. Judah and Tamar show us that God's plan does not depend on our perfection. It depends on His faithfulness, that He can take even the darkest moments of our history and weave into them golden threads that will lead to redemption. If this story touched your heart, if it changed the way you see God's grace, leave your comment below. Tell your own story. Share how God transformed your shame into a blessing. Because when we share our stories, we break the power of shame and release the power of hope. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos about life-changing Bible stories. Share this content with someone who needs to hear that no matter what happened in the past, God still has a plan. And remember, you are not defined by your mistakes. You are defined by the grace that has reached you. You are not what you have done. You are what God is doing in you. The story of Judah and Tamar is not just an ancient story. It's a mirror that reflects the truth about all of us. We are flawed, imperfect, often desperate, but we are loved. We are redeemed. And we are used by a God who specializes in turning the impossible into miracles. May this truth set you free today. May it heal you. May it propel you forward, knowing that no mistake is too big, no shame too deep, no story too dirty for God's grace to reach. Because if he can use Judah and Tamar to bring Jesus into the world, imagine what he can do with you.